Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Paramita and I heartily welcome you to my channel Paramita PM. If you are new to my channel, then I would request you to go through the content of my channel, look at the videos, and if you really find those videos helpful and if they really heighten your interest, then do like it, share it, and do not forget to subscribe to my channel. And most importantly, please turn on the notification bell button so that you get notified whenever I upload any new videos on my channel. So now, without any further ado, let's get into the lecture. In this audio lecture, we shall continue discussing the significance of chapter 3 of A Room of One's Own. So we found that Judith committed suicide after she got impregnated by a theatrical man. So the narrator now realizes and she believes that this would have been exactly the condition of a female genius in Shakespeare's time. Of that time would have got such genius like Shakespeare. It was not only impossible for a woman to prosper like Shakespeare, but it should be noted that it was not even possible for a woman of that time to have got such genius like Shakespeare. Now, why is it so? It is because the narrator says that genius or creative talent can never flourish, can never prosper among those who are laboring, whose lives are confined to doing domestic chores, who are uneducated, and who always was the category to which women belonged during Shakespeare's time. And so, it was not possible for a woman to have genius like Shakespeare because genius can never take birth among those people who are uneducated, who are always working, laboring, whose lives are confined within the four walls, and who lead a life of servility. So genius cannot take birth when one is, tied to the chains of domesticity. Count that even like that women, they were hardly out of their nursery, that they were forced to get married by their parents, and they were also made to, stick to their marriage. They were also made to remain to held to their marriage by the power of law and custom. This kind of life women had at that point of time. Yet, the narrator believes that genius, some kind of genius among women, then as it also exists among the working class, although their work never got translated to paper, were never published. And even if a woman, succeeded in overcoming the obstacles that came on her way and wrote something creative, still she had to hide her identity. Her work remained anonymous. She had to, write anonymously. She had to use pseudonyms in order to hide her true identity. So, according to the narrator, money and personal independence These are two necessary or indispensable ingredients to foster freedom of thought, because poverty always causes inhibition. Poverty would never allow one's creative talent to prosper, unless that person has money and personal independence. So during the Elizabethan period, even if a highly creative, talented girl tried to use her talent for writing poetry, she would have been opposed, she would have been hindered, prevented by other people, by her surrounding, to such a degree that finally she would feel tortured and sanity. Because the world in general was not only indifferent to women's creativity, but they simply opposed it vehemently. Their attitude towards women's creativity was that of hostility. So if any girl during that time period, during Shakespeare's time, would have at least tried to write anything creative, still and thought it to such an extent that she would have simply lost her mind, she would have simply lost the sanity of her mind, certainly. And during the 16th century, if a woman was, suppose if a woman were a poet and playwright, the very state, if she if she lived a free life, it would become a kind of stress and dilemma, out of which she might have killed herself, because the very state would make her, or would rather compel her to kill herself, because it was not expected of a woman of that time. And even if she had survived, whatever she had written, proving that all these things were that this creativity was the result of let's say of a disordered, of a strained imagination. It was the result of a strained, sound mind. So this idea of chastity was very much prevalent in that period. And this idea, this sense of chastity, to retain one's chastity as a woman, she had to write anonymously under pseudonyms. And even so late as the narrator mentions that it was even so as late as the 19th century, women writers had to use pseudonyms in order to hide their identity, because publicity in women is detestable. So we find that in the 16th century, even if a woman was born with creative talent, with a gift of poetry, then but still she became unhappy. She was always in conflict with her own self, because the conditions of her life, whatever dreams she had, her instincts, her impulses, all appeared to be hostile to her state of mind, which is required to give way to her creative talent. So whatever was lying in her mind, in her brain, that needed to be released, and for that she needed a mind, a particular state of mind. But then all her own instincts, everything stood on her way to given to creativity. It did not allow her. The conditions of her living did not allow her to have that kind of mind, to have that state of mind where she could pursue her creativity, where she could give way to her creative talent. And so now the question that comes to the narrator's mind, is what state of mind is most favorable to the act of creation? What kind of mind or what state of mind is actually needed by a woman, to create something? Says that when Shakespeare wrote Lear and Antony and Cleopatra, we as readers, we do not know what state of mind was he in at that point of time, because he never spoke of his mind until the 19th century, when authors began to talk about their mind, their self-consciousness. They started writing letters, they started speaking for their mind in confessions and autobiographies. But earlier, during the 16th century, Shakespeare did not ever speak of his mind. So now the narrator believes, and the narrator believes that it is really difficult. It is indeed a great difficulty on the part of her. It is extraordinarily difficult. And the world is such, in general, that it is always indifferent to whether someone writes or does not write. And as far as women are concerned, in the past, their conditions were even worse. They did not have the privacy of a room, and the attitude of the world in general is that of indifference, always distracting, always discouraging a creative mind. And one has to overcome these difficulties in order to create a work of art, because the world would never ask people to write poems, to come up with some creative work. It would never ask people to write novels and histories and poems. Rather, they always face people like Keats, Flaubert, Carlyle. They always suffered this kind of distraction and discouragement. And still, despite this situation, if they had been successful in creating a work of art, then it is indeed a miracle. And then when it comes to the condition of women, they did not even have the privacy of a private room, or vacation was a rarity. So one couldn't think room of her own, her privacy, because it was something out of question. Unless her parents were, rich and wealthy or very noble. But still, it let women to have a room of their own up to the beginning of the 19th century. So we can see that men had privacy to pursue their creative task, while for women, it was something beyond imagination. A woman could never think of. Men even had their separate lodging, separate room. No matter how miserable it was, but still they had that shelter actually, allowed them to pursue their creative work. It also protected them and tyrannies of their families. So we can see that this world is, the world was not only indifferent to female writers, but it actually very, very actively opposed their creativity. So men had to bear only the indifference of the world, while women had to bear the indifference as well as the hostility. Because whenever a woman would, whenever a woman would attempt to write, the question that would be asked was that what's the point in writing? So now the narrator wants to see that what effect does this discouragement have upon the mind of the artist. And then, of discouragement upon the mind of an artist. She says that the effect is very, very detrimental, because over time it is found that this discouragement does not allow the budding female writer pursue her creative talent. And the narrator believes that this kind of discouragement comes from men because of their masculine desire to retain their status of superiority. And she says that it is the masculine opinion that ever be expected of women, and this way they kept on discouraging women. It seemed as if it became a norm for men to discourage women. And we know that it is very, and the narrator also says that it is very, very, unfortunate that genius is very, very susceptible to the opinions of others. A mind which is creative, a mind which is talented, unfortunately, always becomes a victim of this discouraging opinions. It is very, very susceptible to the opinions of others, and it is very unfortunate because it hinders their creativity. And is that even in the 19th century, women were discouraged to be, women were not encouraged to be an artist. She was discouraged to such degree that all her vitality, all her energy, all her enthusiasm got drained. And she says that it is the masculine complex which influences, the women's movement. It is the masculine got so much of influence upon the women's movement because they have this deep-seated desire. And what is that desire? It is a man's desire to be superior, to be regarded as the superior sex, to retain the status of superiority. They are not at all bothered whether women would be inferior or not, but they are only concerned about their own superiority, and that makes them discourage women all the more. So here she talks about Lady Bessborough, who had passion for politics. She was very passionate about politics, but then even despite her interest, despite her passion for politics, she would humbly bow herself and write to Lord Granville Leveson Gower, a violence in politics in spite of her opinions on that very subject. She agrees with him that no woman has any right or has any business to interfere with politics or any other serious business. So we can see that how a woman, despite having passion for a subject, bows herself before a man and agrees with his opinion, that a woman has no right to interfere with any serious subject. A woman has no right to interfere with any serious subject. A woman has no right to talk about, any serious matter or any serious subject or to express her opinion. here, while talking about genius, the narrator now says that the artist's mind, she believes that an artist's mind must be incandescent. It should be shining like Shakespeare's. Why did Shakespeare prosper? Because his mind was free of any obstacles. He did not have to face any obstacles like Judith. He got the opportunity to educate. He got the opportunity to educate himself. He got his opportunity in the world of theatre. So there was no he had to face, so there was no obstacle on his way to prosperity. This is number one. It helped him to have an incandescent mind, a luminous, shining mind, a mind which was free of any obstacles, which had the freedom of thought. So she says that genius, if one, is determined to prosper, then that genius would have to ignore everything that hinders it from flourishing. So, this susceptibility to the opinions of, then only genius can prosper. Genius should be above caring. So one should not care. If one wishes to pursue one's creativity, if one wishes to write a work of art, then the first and foremost thing that person has to do is to ignore everything that is said about him. But she also agrees that it is unfortunate that genius, that the nature of an artist's mind is such that it would always, be susceptible. It would always pay attention to the opinions of others. And this is most unfortunate. And she also says that this susceptibility, becomes this susceptibility influences them to such an extent that sometimes they even give up on their writing. So she considers this susceptibility of an artist's mind to the opinions of others to be very, very unfortunate, and she believes that one has to overcome this susceptibility in order to prosper, in order to make one's creative talent flourish. So, as we come to the end of this chapter, we find the narrator saying that while talking about the state of mind which is most favorable for creativity, she says that one must have an incandescent mind, which would be passionate, which would be filled with strong emotions, and there must not be any obstacle. So the mind should be free of any obstacles. She says that why we know so little about Shakespeare's mind is because his work does not portray or does not express his personal grudges and spites and antipathies. They're all filtered and spites and antipathies. They're all filtered out by his work. So when we read any work by Shakespeare, we do not come across any revelation which would remind us or which would help us have which would give us an insight into the writer's mind or an insight into the writer's life. So this is he doesn't appear as a dramatist. He doesn't appear to protest. He doesn't appear to preach or teach anything through his work. So this is the absence of his personal protest that makes his work free and unimpeded, meaning unhindered. And finally, she concludes this chapter saying, if ever a human being got his work expressed completely, then it was none but Shakespeare. If ever there was a mind which was incandescent, unhindered, then it was Shakespeare's mind. Because protest literature dilutes the of the writer. It does not allow him to have that degree of brilliance in his creative work. So in this chapter, we get to see the difference between Shakespeare's life and between Shakespeare's life and Judith and Judith's life, her imaginative sister, where we come to know about like how Shakespeare's natural genius was helped. So many factors were there which helped him prosper, like his education. Then after he got married, he left his family and he went to London to pursue his career. Then the way he got appreciated and accepted in the theatrical world, then he was able to earn money. That is, he had that financial independence and the world. And most importantly, Shakespeare did not have any familial responsibility. So the obstacles which could have prevented his genius to prosper were overcome by him. While in case of Judith, we find that she becomes a victim of several socio-economic factors. She did not have education. Her family always discouraged her from reading and writing. She did not have a room of her own. She did not get any opportunity in the artistic world. She was rejected by the theatrical world. And then she got impregnated later on. This unfortunate incident which finally led to the end of her life. Apart from these factors, we find that the world has always been indifferent to women's creativity, and they always discouraged them to pursue their creative work, because this was the structure of their creative work, because this was the structure of the patriarchal society. Because men always wanted to, ensure their status of superiority, and so they did not want women below them, so that they could simply use them as mirrors, which would, reflect them as magnificent, which would reflect them as highly superior individuals. And the narrator believes, and she concludes saying that these kinds of obstacles are are very poisonous to a writer's mind. Because they would always, create obstacles on the path of a writer to attain genius. While Shakespeare was not at all prevented, Shakespeare did not face any obstacles as such. The world gave him that opportunity to become Shakespeare. So he became Shakespeare, and he was able to have that incandescent mind. While women, because of their lack of freedom, because of their lack of privacy, and due to their poverty, failed to pursue their creativity. So, finally, this chapter is concluded by the narrator saying, or let's say she concludes the chapter acknowledging Shakespeare as having the most incandescent mind and as someone who was able to express himself. He was able to express his work completely. And with this note, this chapter comes to an end.